Hey there, we're down to the last 10 days of voting on this channel's next big topic. It looks like a clear favorite is emerging, but we've still got half of the votes uncounted, and there's plenty of time to sign up and make your voice heard. Today we'll lay out the last of the three options, one that actually includes the other two options, and really everything else. Today I want to talk about U.S. empire. And to do that, I want to talk Thucydides. Thucydides was a historian writing about 2,400 years ago. His topic was a decades-long war between Athens and Sparta that he had participated in. Now, you may think it's ridiculous to look to these ancient, tiny, agrarian, slave-based city-states for examples that determine the fate of the world-spanning U.S. empire. And I would completely agree with you on that. I've got a 5-year-old video on the channel that talks about just how stupid this comparison is. Unfortunately, the thinkers of the U.S. military-industrial complex persist in using it. So let's try to do a better job with it than they do. It won't be hard. In the Washington, D.C. version we keep getting sold, the United States is Sparta, the old established power, and China is Athens, the new surging power. Because these slave-driving, majority pre-literate societies couldn't figure out how to live within 150 miles of each other, the United States and China are destined to fight. Like I said, stupid. But this infantile approach is also pretty insulting to Thucydides, who had a much richer story to tell. If you actually read Thucydides, which I admittedly haven't done for a couple decades, you quickly see that the United States is a much better fit for the role of Athens than for the role of Sparta. Let me tell you the way that I see this story. 2,500 years ago, the Greek world faced an existential threat. The Persians wanted to swallow it whole, both with overwhelming force and with an ideology of submission that the Greeks found repellent. The movie 300 has cemented the idea that beating Persia was all about the Spartans, but in truth, the Athenians were probably more than equal partners in this. Like the Russians against the Nazis in World War II, or the Chinese against the Soviets if the Cold War had turned hot, the Spartans provided indispensable land armies. But it was Athens that provided the logistics, the navy, the wealth, and the diplomacy that tied all the other Greek city-states together. The United States sounds a lot more like Athens than Sparta to me. Like the Allies in World War II or the US-led bloc in the Cold War, the Greeks ended the Persian threat to their lands with a series of battles you may have heard of. What Thucydides documents is what happened after Marathon and Salamis. You see, Athens got to like the league of city-states that it had put together to fight Persia and the profits that it brought. Long after the Persian threat had faded, Athens continued to get progressively harsher and harsher in the ways that it punished Greek political units that stepped out of line. The Athens-led alliance had become the Athenian Empire. Does that sound at all familiar to you? Like the Athenians, the U.S. got so used to leading a fight that they refused to stop leading after the fight was over. Athens asserted its dominance in very straightforward ways, with open theft and genocide. In our modern post-industrial society, the weapons are usually more subtle. Innocuous acronyms like FATCA, OFAC, and CFIUS may not mean much to you, but honest attorneys recognize the power grabs they represent. U.S. laws are slowly becoming the world's laws. We used to let other countries have big companies, but that's not the case anymore. And countries that refuse to bend the knee are subject to consequences just as horrific as the ones that the Athenians imposed. This is the story of U.S. empire that I would like to tell. Not just the obvious story of pointless destruction in places like Latin America and the Middle East, but the larger tale of diminished freedom everywhere, as U.S. institutions use technology and law to force our way of life on the entire world. This is a vital story not just because of its titanic scale, but because it's getting a lot worse, pretty quickly in historical terms. 3 decades ago, we used the principle of freedom from aggression to justify our occupation of the Middle East. We couldn't let Iraq use military force against its smaller neighbor. As of today, we have spent 5 years defending Saudi Arabia's invasion of its smaller neighbor, and we just recognized Morocco's annexation of war-won territory in return for minor favors for one of our client states. That's how far we have fallen in just 30 years. What are things going to look like in another 30 years? The war that Thucydides documented came about not because a Sparta or a China got uppity, but because everybody else got sick of Athenian bullshit and gravitated towards Sparta to help rid them of it. Athens lost that conflict miserably, which also led, within a few decades, to the end of the classical era of Greek freedom. A conflict like that, involving the United States, could very well lead to the end of human civilization. It's not like the US world system doesn't provide benefits. It absolutely does. The world is richer than it has ever been, and we have opportunities for human flourishing that would be unimaginable to the people of earlier centuries. Any series on US empire would have to acknowledge that. But the power and prosperity that the US world system has brought also leads naturally to attempts to consolidate and abuse that power. There isn't enough media out there that covers both sides of that equation. It's a bit disingenuous of me to suggest a new series on US empire. Like all 500 videos on this channel talk about US empire to one degree or another. But if you guys choose this option, it will give us an opportunity to step back and look at the big picture of the past century. It's a story I intend to tell eventually. You guys get to decide if I tell this story next. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. Only 10 days left to vote. If you want to help choose this channel's future, you can sign up to do so at the Patreon link here, then click on the link to the poll in this video's description. Thank you.